Welcome to today's video conference. This is the 23rd in our weekly briefings to track the pandemic and its impact on ethnic communities. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Today, our focus is on arts and culture, how artists, performers, and arts promoters are working in the pandemic to keep the arts alive. Our distinguished speakers include Kristen Sakota, Director of the LA County Department of Arts and Culture, and herself a Broadway performer. Christina Wong, a performance artist and comedian who organized a network of mask makers and runs her own show from her living room in Koreatown, Los Angeles. Roberto Pozos, an artist and graphic designer from Calexico, who will speak about the state of the arts in small cities and rural communities, and Jose Luis Valenzuela, artistic director for the LA Theater Center, who will speak about the future of theaters devastated by closures around the country. Our thanks to Blue Shield of California Foundation for supporting this initiative and to our speakers. I also want to thank veteran reporter Pilar Marrero and Sunita Sarabji, who coordinate our weekly Zoom briefings. Our interpreters today are Oscar Arteta, Kenneth Fong, and Jackie No, who will provide simultaneous interpreting into Spanish, Cantonese, and Korean. We ask everyone who speaks on today's conference to speak slowly and clearly. This will make a huge difference to our interpreters. We will reserve a few minutes after each speaker completes their presentation for your questions. If there's time at the end of the call, we'll take additional questions. We will send questions that haven't been answered on the chat box to our speakers to respond. We will be sending out a video of today's call along with expanded bios of our speakers after the conference. And we will send a transcription in English as soon as we get it to everyone on the call. Now I'm turning the conference over to our moderator, Pilar Marrero. Pilar.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for all the colleagues that are here. My gratitude to all the amazing panel that we have today that I'm very happy to moderate. And because we mentioned the New Deal in the title of this event, I wanted to read a little bit to you from the National Archives of the United States. This is something that surprised me. I didn't know that during the depths of the Great Depression in the 1930s, and into the early years of World War II, the federal government supported the arts in unprecedented ways. For 11 years, between 1933 and 1943, federal tax dollars employed artists, musicians, actors, writers, photographers, and dancers. Never before or since has our government so extensively sponsored the arts. The project saved thousands of artists from poverty and despair. Will we need to see or get to see anything like that as the COVID-19 pandemic hits hard on arts and culture in our communities? So without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker. Kristen Sakota is the director of the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture. She is an arts executive, attorney, and performing artist with more than 25 years in the field. She was a key strategist for arts and culture in the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. Christine, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Pilar, and I'm really pleased to be with all of you today. So I'm Kristen Sakota, Director of the LA County Department of Arts and Culture, and some of you may know that we just completed our inaugural year as the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, following what was a historic vote of the LA County Board of Supervisors to transition us from operating previously as the LA County Arts Commission for more than 70 years into creating the first ever Department of Arts and Culture. And so I'm rooted very firmly at the intersection of the arts, philanthropy as a funder of the arts, and government. And so thinking about those, you'll probably hear a bit of all of them in my remarks today. So what do? Well, we as the local arts agency for LA County, we support the arts, culture, and creativity. We do that by grant making. So we provide grants to hundreds of arts nonprofits of every artistic discipline, all throughout the county, as well as professional development and technical assistance for them. We also have robust activities in arts education. So the role of the arts in a holistic education benefiting all of our youth and students, and we have public-private initiatives there. And we also commission artists for civic art projects, as well as conducting research and producing our own reports of interest in arts and culture, and building on cross-sector strategies, the ways that the arts supports us in human development, community development, economic development, and different ways all across the county. Now, Los Angeles County is large, and so as one of the largest and most diverse counties in the nation, that means that our reach and our jurisdiction encompasses 88 different cities, Los Angeles City, of course, the largest of them, and more than 10 million people with 81 different school districts and more than 220 languages spoken here, which I'm sure you know. So of the more than 480 or so diverse organizations that we support, they range from theater to dance to media to museums, and many of them have deep cultural ties to our communities. So these are organizations like the Japanese American National Museum, which makes sure we never forget the Japanese internment and the Japanese American experience. The Skirball Cultural Center, which for so many years has not only brought about lenses on Jewish life, but really a universal experience. Cornerstone Theater Company, or the Pan-African Film Festival, East West Players, one of the longest running theaters of color that we have in the nation that puts forward an AAPI lens. These are all examples of organizations that we fund and support. So when our communities or your readers go to their performances or want to know what's happening with these organizations, part of how they exist and operate and provide what collectively across all of the field are 13 million visits or experiences every year here in LA County through the arts nonprofits. That's in part due to support by funders and public sectors like mine. So that was some context setting, a little more context setting before we talk really about COVID-19 impacts. In LA County, a lot of folks don't realize, but
could I just interrupt you and say we're signaled by our interpreters? Could you just slow a little bit, even though we're hanging on every word?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And if it's helpful, also just to add, in case anyone is either just listening in or sight impaired, I am a female. I go by she, her, hers. I am an African-American woman with locks and glasses and a petite stature, but a big sense of passion. Okay, so setting the context for Los Angeles, we're really an arts and creative capital of the nation and of the world. We're one of our capitals. So one thing people don't know is not only Hollywood and the commercial sector, but we have more museums here than many other cities around the country, and theaters as well. So we have more than 200 museums. We have about 279 art galleries. We have more than 500 heritage or historical sites. We have more than 300 theaters, independent theaters. And these are all in addition to the hundreds of live music venues or major concert halls, movie theaters, bookstores, literary arts, and of course our huge county and various city library systems as well. And so within that, we see performing arts organizations, about 226 of them at least. There are a number also of community-based organizations of every kind. So when COVID hit the arts sector quite hard. You might recall that even before there was a stay-at-home order, performances, films, movie theaters, cultural venues had to stop and shut down right away in March. And so what we have seen is that nationally, we track the data from Americans for the Arts and other colleagues, and we know that the impact on arts and culture, the sector nationally, is now reached more than $12 billion impact of lost revenue and unanticipated expenses. We also know nationally there are more than 5 million creative workers in this sector, many of them now out of work. Here in Los Angeles County, based on reports and surveys of the field of arts nonprofits, we've seen collectively more than $20 million of financial impact just on 250 of the arts nonprofits that responded. We've seen 39% have already dipped into financial reserves, 40% have furloughed or laid off staff, and 78% are worried about a decline in philanthropic giving. And we've seen, sadly, a high percentage, about 50%, that say they're worried about even surviving as an organization after COVID. So the support of the field is necessary. Now, I want to share also that even before COVID, because we're talking about the arts nonprofits, vital as they often are undercapitalized. So not a lot of cash on hand, and a lot of the community-based organizations or smaller budget organizations and those that really reflect and serve communities of color and other kinds of culturally rooted practices often don't have the same access to donors or to large amounts of capital. And so that's really a lot of times the focus of our work, where a lot of our grant programs, for example, the majority of the organizations we support are small and mid-sized organizations, including many that serve our historically marginalized communities. So some of the ways we've responded to COVID is that we've put a lot of resources on our website. So definitely lacountyarts.org, we have a digital resource center, digital arts resource center, that includes not only grants that we have, but an assortment of relief grants for individual artists, for nonprofits, and for others in the sector. We also share there some examples of arts organizations that are providing programs and services online. Shifting to virtual formats has been a huge impact of this moment. And so we've seen that. We've seen 70 to 80% of organizations are trying to still serve their communities in these innovative ways, even if they're not getting paid. So supporting that is there. We also have resources of how you can support creativity at home. Our schools, and there's a big digital divide, but our schools and our youth and families have lost those 13 million experiences a year. And so trying to help and provide creativity at home is there as well. So we also accelerated our grant payments to get those out the door. And we're still celebrating the 20th year of our county arts internship program. It's the largest paid arts internship program in the country. We do it as a companion with the Getty, which has a one in visual arts, because we know that youth right now, the younger folks up to age like 24 or so, have very high unemployment rates. It was very important that we continued this program, which gives opportunities for diverse college students at community college and universities to have a paid internship experience in the arts at a host organization. And lastly, one thing I want to mention, in addition to our regular grant programs and opportunities that we have on our website, is we were able to make available $10 million from the county's CARES Act relief that we are going to be putting out the door very shortly for the hard-hit arts nonprofit sector. So we announced that a few weeks ago, and now starting, I believe, next week, we will be increasing the communications and releasing the guidelines for the COVID-19 Arts Relief Fund from the CARES Act. So, you know, I think as anyone can attest, not just the arts, but all of you, this is such an unprecedented moment. We know that there are multiple crises. So the COVID health pandemic, but the resulting economic crisis, and really a crisis of confronting systemic inequity, systemic racism, and the need to center those voices and really find new ways to reimagine how we invest in communities and what things like public safety mean. Because this is just a moment where we know there's no going back to how things were before. And in some ways, that's a good thing. I'm a fan of the never waste a crisis. So if we're going to have this moment, what gains can we make? What changes can we make? And so for us, we see the way forward in arts and culture as a few key things that I want to highlight to close. One, when we think about equity, we must also think about what we call cultural equity and inclusion. That is that everybody deserves access to arts and culture, no matter your background, your income, or your geographic location, and all of our artistic and cultural forms should be recognized, valued, and supported. Unfortunately, we still see a lot of disparities in the country around certain kinds of art forms or certain communities not having access to arts education or not having significant funding and their kinds of cultural practices and artistic expression resourced. We also know, and this relates to Pilar, your comments at the beginning about the New Deal. Building on the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, or later the CETA Act in the 70s, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, we need to recognize creative work is still work, and that actually arts, culture, and creativity is essential to all of our community's recovery. So we can't turn away from the arts. They're not just a nice to have. They're not just for elites. It actually, we have lots of studies we can point to that show you that having cultural resources in communities, you actually see better outcomes for that community in education, in health outcomes, and in public safety, and that it supports our well-being. Students who have access to creative outlets in school, they stay in school longer, they're more engaged, right? So all of these things are part of healthy communities, so we need the arts to be part of recovery efforts. And I'll also say that we know that the way forward will be new, and there will probably be more innovations and more blended virtual and in-person ways to experience the arts, but that we've got to continue to addressing equity and ensuring access and looking at the arts as a trusted partner for all of us in our healing, our creativity, and our economic recovery going forward. So I couldn't think of a better topic for how to reimagine the future than the arts. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk more about any of our programs or the Los Angeles arts community.
Okay, thank you so much, Christine. We do have a couple of questions, a couple of questions. Sunita, do you want to ask your question?
Sorry. Kristen, have you found organizations that have successfully monetized moving to a digital format? I know here in San Francisco, we have SF Jazz, who every Friday at 5 has an online session. And I'm sure that you have similar programs. Are there any that have been able to monetize the digital space?
Thank you, great question. We've seen a few. But I think it's a huge structural thing to tackle, really, for this field, because for a lot of organizations, it's not the way they were working, or they may not have the same access to equipment or to staff even. Some of the large organizations had a lot of built-in marketing staff already, or had a lot of digital assets. So if you're a big budget organization, maybe you're the LA Opera, the LA Phil, you might have already had fabulous recordings that now you can re-air and monetize perhaps a deal to re-air or just maintain your audience. Other organizations are really having to make the shift from the beginning. We've seen a couple of interesting things. So we have seen a couple of organizations do really well blending a virtual experience with maybe sending something to your home. So you pay to have access to this virtual performance, but in advance, they mail you something that you then receive. And so there's actually been an interesting, theater show that was based on magic, and they mailed things home to the ticket holders to have as part of it. We've seen some galas and fundraisers that worked well. And we've also seen interesting, we partnered, our department, LA County Arts, partnered with the City of LA Cultural Affairs and KCET, which is part of PBS SoCal, to do the Southland Sessions, to amplify the role of the arts and pay artists to be on virtual and broadcast. But it's still a nut we have to crack, because a lot of these organizations are not getting any money from it. Some virtual arts education lessons are happening, paid as well. But again, nothing replaces in person. A lot of organizations are not earning dollars, and some art forms have traditionally had a harder time, like dance. My background's in dance and theater personally. You've never really been able to replicate the live experience. So no one pays for a video of dance the way they might pay for a CD of music, because even though that's different than a live performance, it still has something that people have found a model that they can pay for. So how do we get to that? How do we have a subscription service where you pay for theater virtually, or where Netflix wants to show dance performances? I think we're now being pushed to innovate faster. We've seen drive-ins. The Outfest Film Festival, which is a grantee of art, they did part of it as a drive-in experience. So we're seeing new models, but sustainability will be a big question going forward.
Thank you so much. I'm going to allow one more question because we're a bit late. So Frank Blanquette, can you ask your question, please?
Thank you, Pilar. Kristen, my name is Frank Blanquette with First Nations Experience Television. Thank you for your presentation and information. I have two questions for you. With Native American communities being among the least represented in media and one of the most stereotypically portrayed communities, how do you see theater and arts giving a voice to some Native and Indigenous artists, playwrights, actors, dancers, and media makers in the Los Angeles area? Have you seen this grow in recent years? And also, what guidance can you give to philanthropists that want to specifically contribute to Native American and Indigenous arts?
Sure, great question. So absolutely, I think representation is a big part of it, right? Everyone should have the chance to see and have their stories told or tell their stories, but we also should all have a chance to experience one another's stories. I'm a firm believer that the power of the arts is so strong that it actually undergirds social movements and can change our perspective on one another, so that when we see someone of Native heritage, or we see a young Black boy in the street, depending on the experiences and exposure we've had to those cultures, to those people, seeing them represented, not in stereotypical ways, but in deeply human ways, that might actually change and make the decision about how we react to that person, whether you're, a cop or anybody else, a police officer or anybody else. So I think this is so important. One of the things that I would encourage, absolutely, is that we're seeing a trend that moving from just a notion of diversity is not enough, that we actually need to be thinking about equity and inclusion in the field. And so in philanthropy, we're seeing folks being much more willing and intentional about how are their dollars going to support Native and Indigenous communities, as well as organizations that reflect those communities. We're also pushing innovations in things like public art. So right now, for example, we just closed an opportunity inviting Native and Indigenous artists to help share those perspectives in Grand Park, a park that we have in Los Angeles, as a way to increase those perspectives. But I will tell you, not only in media representation, but we have not seen a significant number of arts organizations in Los Angeles that are led by Native and Indigenous groups, but we do have some, and I think there's a stronger move now. We also have alliances like the Association for Traditional Arts. We have a lot of different organizations. So I would urge all of our funders to really think about how they can increase the funding to those groups, to those artists, and help center their voices that have never really been centered in our sort of American cultural land and historical landscape before.
Thank you so much, Christine. You are wonderful. Thank you for all the information you gave us. Next, I will introduce our second speaker. She's Christina Wong. She's a comedian known primarily for her work as a solo theater performer, performance artist, and actor. She also currently serves as an elected representative of the Wilshire Center Subdistrict 5 Koreatown Neighborhood Council in Los Angeles. And right now, she's performing her play, Christina Wong for Public Office, from her living room. She also started a network that produced massive amounts of masks to distribute across the country. Christina, thank you for being with us.
Reporters, are you ready to rally? I can't hear you. I said you reporting from quarantine in your house in front of your laptop. Are you ready to rally? Are you ready to throw blind fanatical support around a candidate who makes promises and maybe delivers on half of them? Are you ready to project all your hopes and dreams onto what I will convince you that I am? Are you ready for me to stop screaming at this volume from the side of my computer? Well then please, give it up for your favorite and forever public servant, Christina Wong.
Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. You know, I could have had today's rally on tour where it was scheduled in Hawaii or New England, where I was supposed to actually be this week, but I was like, you know what? No thanks. Give me an audience that had to crawl up from bed, sit upright at their desk at home, put their kids in the other room during a global pandemic, because they are the rowdiest runs. Am I right, America? Now, some of you may know me as Christina Wong, the performance artist. Some of you have no idea who I am because I am a performance artist. What you are witnessing now started 3 years ago as a purely performative campaign where I rallied for a political seat that I had not even filed to run for. I did things like debate a dog. It's a very cute dog. I won both debates. It was a poodle mix. Meet and greets on Hollywood Boulevard with an actual political puppet. I even did focus groups with voters to see if they would notice when I plagiarized speaking points from political dictators throughout history. Fun fact, most voters think that Stalin is a quirky guy with a big vision. But after 3 years of those shenanigans, I come here rallying to you tonight as a performance artist turned real life politician. I may have never grabbed anyone by their genitals without their permission. I may not be able to get us into war with Iran or a dead senator war hero or with windmills. I may have never paid off a porn star. In fact, I may have never paid for porn. But despite all those shortcomings, I was able to prove to my constituents that I have what it takes to serve in public office. Last April, with 71 votes, if you do not count the vote that I cast for myself, I became the real-life elected official of Subdistrict 5, Wilshire Center, Koreatown Neighborhood Council. And now I am a performance artist turned politician. So that was my show. That was the intro of my show, Christina Wong for Public Office, which was set. I see the applause. I'll take it, Pilar. Which was set to tour nationally and be a commentary on all the rallies that we would be experiencing up until the election. It was the most timely show of my life. It was set up to be like a rally, like an emotional live rally, but it was a theater piece. COVID hit in the middle of a tour I did in Sacramento. I was at a community college 30 minutes before the show ended. All the students got a text on the phone saying that the campus was going online the next day. I had no income lined up. This whole national tour I had set up, postponed. I was like, there's no way I could do this rally from my house. People were like, just stream it online. I'm like, you do not understand that theater, like teaching, it's not the same thing online. But lo and behold, here I am. I have an election themed show. Was inspired by my director, Diana, who also has transferred her show online. And this is my home. This is a rally I do in my house. This is how this is my Steadicam, which is basically, can you see this as an office chair with 2 Tupperwares on it. So I put this on this chair, and I in lieu of a light change that might happen in theater, I'm like, I do different scenes of the show in my house. I tell different stories. I tell a story about how I ended up on a ballot because I got so high, basically, that I was seeing things. I got really high one night, and then when I came out from being so super high, I woke up on a ballot. right? So I basically had to adapt this one person show for a rowdy audience in my actual home. It's become quite intimate. I feel I did lose some engagements because those theaters basically couldn't stay afloat. And it's often said in the arts community that universities and colleges are the largest patrons of living artists that there are, whether that means giving artists work as professors or presenting artists at schools to students. So those venues have been the ones that have been able to honor contracts that we were negotiating at the time or bring me. And I have a little bit of an advantage in being able to present my shows online, in that it's timely, it's election themed, right? It's one person addressing the camera. So if I was in a situation where I was running a 10-person dance company, I'd obviously have a much harder time translating that online. But that's, so I'm basically living on top of my on top of my set. My bedroom is over there. My fireplace used to be there. What can I say of this? So it's been a little bit of a nightmare, but at this point, I feel like the content of the show is so important. I spent 3 years running for office as research for the show, creating this show, and it's so important that folks vote. So I've pushed forward through the agony of like, I can't focus. There's a pandemic. I can't remember any of these lines that I had totally memorized in February, and I've just done it. I will say that all my set pieces are sewn. I sew my own sets. So this skill has lent itself to my other project during the pandemic, which is, I'm not a professional seamstress. I sew things literally on a Hello Kitty sewing machine. And a week into the pandemic, I got an article that there was a shortage of cloth face masks for nurses, doctors, and essential workers. And I was like, oh, I sew. I have something essential I do. And long story short, like 6 months later, I still run a group called the Auntie Sewing Squad. A lot of us are artists who have no income, who lives have been turned upside down by this, but we know how to sew. These are skills that maybe we've used to sew costumes or set pieces, and now we're making medical equipment. Why are we still sewing 6 months later when there are now cheap masks all over the street and flooded the market? Well, as it turns out, something called structural racism has made it possible for many communities to not even be able to access very cheap masks. So at this point, we are no longer making masks for hospitals and frontline workers in big cities who make salaries, but we're making masks for indigenous communities. We've actually done 5, and I can't even believe I'm doing this because I'm a crazy performance artist. So we've done, but here I am, I'm doing relief work, but we've done 5 relief vehicles headed to the Navajo Nation. Originally that started with us just trying to support a seamstress group there that was sewing their own PPE. And we thought, well, we can bring them some fabric from the garment district. And it's in theory possible to do a round trip to them, drop all that stuff off and come back to LA in one long day. But there was so much room in the van, we ended up adding hygiene supplies because there was a lack of running water and just a lot of necessary hygiene things so that folks could keep clean of the virus. We've been doing a lot of work getting masks to farm workers, and recently a second push for farm workers affected by the fires in California. And mind you, none of us have ever done relief work before. We're professors, we're performance artists, we're stage managers. This is where I'm seeing artists pivoting their energy so that because we can't watch this, right? We're used to being scrappy and dealing with little resources and making stuff happen. We are sending masks to incarcerated communities. We've sent some to folks transitioning out of ICE detention, very poor Black and brown communities and other communities of color. So I've basically run the sewing group, and I've created a new show in the pandemic called Christina Wong Sweatshop Overlord. Because I know it's a touchy word, because the first volunteers we had were all Asian, and I was like, what is happening? What kind of like sick, sad irony is this, that like our parents and grandparents did garment work, and to build this American dream. And now this country, which has failed to prepare us for this pandemic, has put us in a position where we're like using Hello Kitty sewing machines and old t-shirts to make masks for doctors. So, but I've just sort of, to keep myself sane as an artist, I'm like, well, I'll just create a show for my home on Zoom that really kind of speaks to the urgency of the moment. And that's all I really know how to do, is to sort of respond to the moment in a way that I hope adds some light, levity, and community. And what has been so great about our Auntie Sewing Squad community is that we were all strangers to each other. We organized on a Facebook group. My own mother sews in the group. She's in San Francisco. We're all over the country, and we've become like a family of folks who work together to identify where the most vulnerable communities are, and make and not in such a way like offering charity, but offering a sort of solidarity offerings that acknowledge their work, their labor, their own sovereignty, these communities, in supporting them with masks and protection.
Thank you, Christina.
So, yeah, that's my presentation.
That was wonderful. Thank you. That was so much fun. Everyone was having fun. I was looking at everyone like smiling, and we don't get a lot of that in these calls. We don't smile that much. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm going to move on to our next speaker because we are running late. Okay, guys? And we're going to save any questions to the end. So next we have Jose Luis Valenzuela, who is the artistic director of the Los Angeles Theater Center and award-winning theater and film director. For more than 25 years, he has directed critically acclaimed productions at major regional theaters, including the Los Angeles Theater Center, where he created the Latino Theater Lab in 1985, and the Mark Taper Forum, where he established a Latino Theater Initiative. He's also Professor Emeritus at the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. Jose Luis, gracias. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much. How can I follow Christina? Come on, Christina. You're so awesome. I love you. It was great, Christina. Thank you. It's amazing. Christina was my student at UCLA long time ago. I love you, Christina. That's pretty fantastic what you're doing. Anyway, so my presentation would never be like Christina. You know, I'm a director, and I work with the Latino community in Los Angeles. I have a theater center, and I work with the students still. After I graduated, I started working more with the East LA community after I retired, because he gave me the opportunity to work with community college students, which is something new for me and kind of phenomenal, because something that I didn't know is that 20% of community college students are homeless, and 37% are, you know, below poverty by means they don't have food to eat and stuff like that. So that's really, really fantastic. A work that it needs to be done in Los Angeles. We have 500,000 students on community colleges, and that's really what I was doing when the pandemic came, and I was rehearsing a play about immigration with students from colleges, and we have to not finish it, not produce it or perform. And what has been the effect that we have for our theater company and some of the theater companies in LA, especially the Latino theater companies, or the African American theater companies, or the Asian American theater companies. We are very few theater companies of color in the LA County. Very, very few. I mean, I think it's 3 Asian theater companies, or 2 really. 2 players at work, I think, is one of them, and then the East as West as the Asian companies, and then African American companies like 3 or 4, understanding that most of them, their budgets are super low, very little, small budgets, the ones that these companies have, especially the African American companies. The Latino theater companies, I think we have like 4 in a city, in a city that is predominantly Latino, meaning I think we're 51% or 52% of the community. Asians, I think, are 30% in the LA County. And the amount of companies that are not, what they were talking about, capital or being, capitalized by, we don't even think about that, meaning we kind of, companies of color in LA, I think, kind of survive by the work that they do, day by day and month by month. I mean, the Latino Theater Company, because we've been together for 35 years, we may be one of the most established companies here with a bigger budget, and the effect that had on us, I mean, we had to cancel everything. We are experimenting with digital programming, whatever that means. Somebody was asking if that makes money. That makes no money. It's worse than live theater. We don't make money even when we're performing in live theater. Forget digital. It's like a sad view of, So, and the reality, what is going to happen, I think, my concern is that many of the small theater companies won't survive this crisis. Yes, because we don't even know when are we going to be able to open. We don't even know when are we going to be able to do work together. And like I say, I mean, doing digital work is great to engage the community, but it really means no money at all. And because our budgets are lower than the regular budgets, when you ask for a grant, they give you the highest maybe that you can get is a group, but our budget is low. So if you get $20,000, meaning, which is what I get, $22,000 is what the county will give me as an organization a year. My light bill is $10,000 at the LATC a month, and forget the security and forget the clean, so it's really difficult, and we don't know. We hope, we think we'll survive, but I think about Casa 101 or the other small Latino theaters that are so important to the community, because what they do is such an important work that, I really don't know how we are going to end up. Meaning, I do have meetings with a lot of the artistic directors in the area, and it's getting more difficult and more difficult. Meaning, it's very, very, very complicated case nationally. As forget it, it's very, very hard, because even in LA, we may be better as people of color, to some of the smaller Latino companies around the country.
Jose Luis, when we spoke before, you were telling me that many of these companies are many of these community offerings are the only way in which a lot of communities have access to the arts, because maybe they can afford the ticket for that, or maybe it's free, sponsor or whatever. If this disappears, what's the effect of that in your opinion?
That's right. I mean, I was talking about how, all of the Latino companies that I know, even our company, you can come to see a play in our theater for $15 or $20. So, we never turn anybody away if they don't have money. And so where do these people see themselves? Where do these people see work that relate to them? Where do these people can come and gather together and talk about who they are as a community? If it's not in our theaters, even if they're small or larger, and this is the only thing that they have. But as you know, meaning the main institutions don't offer anything for our communities at all. So that's not going to be a solution for them. And if we disappear as a cultural hub for the people who live in their communities, and I'm talking about the entire United States. I'm not just talking about this is what the community got to, who identifies with them, who can speak to them, who can talk about their issues, who can talk about their dreams, whatever it is, you know, who give them some sort of cultural relationship to the world. And if we're not here, meaning those communities are going to be more devastated. And, you know, I mean, we're talking about how politicians don't support the arts at all. And why is that? Because we went through 40 years almost without giving arts education in the schools. So our politicians now, who are 40 years old, they had no relationship to the arts growing up. They have no interest in the arts at all. And because they were never taken to the theater, they never taken to a show, they were never having art classes in the schools. And all of that causes the effect that now they are in some position of power and have no relation to the arts. So it's so hard to try to get our political appointees to say, you know, support the arts, support the artists in your community, because they have no relationship to it. Mm-hmm. And they're not interested in it. So
thank you, Jose Luis. Thank you so much. That was very illustrative. So we're going to move on to our last speaker, and that is Roberto Pozos. He's an artist and graphic designer, originally from Calexico, who will tell us about a virtual show that is being organized in Imperial County, by the way, the hardest hit county in California with COVID-19. Last year, he was named Calexico's Distinguished Artist by the nonprofit Calexico Arts Council. Roberto.
Thank you very much, Pilar. And thank you to the Ethnic Media Services for inviting. And I'm just enjoyed Christina Wang's very wonderful presentation and the speakers itself. And just quite honored to be here. Unlike many of you, I'm an artist, I'm a working artist, I'm a graphic designer, illustrator, painter, muralist, dabble in video and all this. As the pandemic started, I realized right away that Imperial Valley, where I'm from, was not getting hit yet, but when it did, it went off the roof. And as you see, when we see the mapping, we see California and we see a red spot, that's Imperial Valley, way down at the border. We're very far away from those major cities. Disparities here hit very hard. Just the economic impact, unemployment, and on top of that, the pandemic. As it is, this Imperial Valley has very few arts groups. It has no major museum. There's no major art establishments. It's a community centers that serve as multi-purpose. That's what we have. So as I was invited by the Imperial Valley newly created Equity and Justice Coalition to, they were asking artists to come together to see what we can do in response to the pandemic in our Imperial Valley. And I was quite eager to join, simply because as a painter, I didn't want to paint anymore what I was painting. I was now painting pandemic subjects because that's where I was living. And I figured that this was something that I had to do because, you know, your mindset is different. Some of my clients' projects were on hold. Other projects were, you know, just moved for future months. So I put all my energy into working with the Equity and Justice Coalition. And as they got together over 20 artists through Zoom, wonderful people, which I really haven't met, but we became very good friends, all through Zoom. And they formed a series of questions to us artists of how to commemorate the suffering, the deaths, how to lift spirits to the community, what can we do to demonstrate a reaction. And I said, you know, it's exactly what I've been pondering, what I've been doing, and how do I share this work that I've been doing? I've been submitting into contests for posters. I've been sharing it with friends. And here was an opportunity now to organize something. So 3 ideas came about. One was to create a virtual art show. Everything is virtual, as we all know. And, you know, where it takes us, it's going to be in unison how we all get impacted and how we're able to use this technology, but it is virtual. and we figured it would be a week long, September 28th to October the 2nd. We're asking anybody who is connected to Imperial Valley in any way. You don't have to live here. You could have passed by and know what this county is, and you want to submit anything from a graphic to a poster to a message. If you're a poet, whatever you want to submit, there is a link in, for you to submit, which will become a website where we will host the virtual art gallery. Other projects came out of the same meeting, which is a poetry night. That poetry night will begin on the 24th of September, which will really kick off this ongoing series of reaction art that I call it, because the pandemic really got us together. Here, people of all ages, I'm kind of on the older age, but there's artists who I didn't know about, but I like their work because I'm already getting familiar with their creativeness and their poetry and writers. And I'm just very proud to see them come out. If a pandemic is what it took, and then it is something that we have to look at in terms of innovation. Third project will be to create later on in the next month, because the pandemic is going to be here and we want to keep lifting spirits, is to do an outdoor art show with the entries that are submitted on the virtual art show. Basically blow them up, put it in a place where people can do their walking outdoors and drive by their cars and be able to enjoy the art at a safe distance and sort of work this way. What we're doing for the artists here is allowing them a place to submit their art without judging, as long as it's, in the theme of hope and resilience to Imperial Valley. We're asking for anything for any age to submit. There's a small entry form that you fill up. If you happen to have no money, but you want to create something, we've actually developed a small budget that will be helping you get the material so you can, submit something and not let money be an obstacle. We'll help you get the supplies. Also, a lot of artists that we've been talking to are talking about their impact. So we are eager to share relief funds information through the Equity and Justice Coalition. They're a great sponsor, great group of people that are very much in support of the arts and the community in general, because they deal with rent moratoriums and many other crucial subjects. Here is an opportunity for us as artists to react, to say, Imperial Valley is resilient. We've been through a lot. We have all these disparities, but yet we will prevail. We will come out of this, and we want to give people that hope that artists haven't forgotten you. Even though there are arts districts and groups in Imperial Valley, they're not really reacting, in my view, to help the people, the general community in both Spanish and English. We're, majority of our Spanish speakers and majority of Mexican ancestry. We're all Mexican Americans here, but we don't see that. You don't see this messaging happening through TV or billboards or get blitz. We see nothing. So here's this group of volunteers on their own getting together to do something, and I'm honored to be part of the group, because we've now changed our created a name, Imperial Valley Artists Unite. So we now have an entity along with the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition to see what it takes us.
Roberto, do you have any support from the local government for artists?
We have a small budget. I believe there's some sponsors that already see this as a potential investment, but I'm yet to see the numbers on that, but I feel it's very small.
In general, do you get your local government to do what, for example, LA County does here?
We need more connection with them, and I've actually reached out to certain people and waiting for responses. So whether they happen or not, we're still going to do this. We are going to react. We are artists, and we might not be able to help a patient or be an essential worker, but I believe art and expression is essential. And if we can lift spirits by having a child's message be on that art show, or a poem that somebody writes because of how they feel with the despair, so their personal trauma or their personal message of hope, whether it's graphics or painting. We want to historically put these together in one place that we can look back and say, you know, we are resilient and we have learned, and now we want, and I want to jump the gun to the future, we want a museum, we want an art center, we want the artists to have attention, and we don't want all these pieces, we really want help. And if the government can jump in, we appreciate it. Personally, I would love to see that.
Okay. All right, Roy.
Yes.
So we are coming up to the noon hour. If we can stay a few more minutes to answer a couple of questions,
Okay.
please do. I think Sunita had a question about the PPP loans. Do you want to ask it?
Have any of you all been able to get PPP loans, and to what extent has that, allowed you to stay on for a little bit longer?
No, none. We don't have any of that. This is all going by word of mouth.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah.
I got a SBA loan, which is like a loan which I think it's okay for me to not pay back. I'm not clear.
That's a PPP loan. Yes.
Is it a PPP?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just sort of like, okay, I hope you don't want this back. But that did help a lot, because I was just working for free for months, and I was like, this makes no sense. I'm not going to be the same person that I'm trying to help. But yeah.
Jose Luis?
Yeah, we got one. We got one.
Oh, that is good. That is
Okay.
good.
Well,
Yes.
And to what extent has that allowed you to stay on for a bit?
Oh, for us, it's great, because, we have, in our organization, I have 14 full-time staff members. And they're fantastic people. They're very young and they do. So we've been trying to keep them on salary. And if we didn't get that loan, we would have to let them go. And really not being able even to do any work on digital, or to, the work doesn't end just because it's down. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so that helped us a little bit to be able at least to pay for some part of the salary, for the last 2 months.
Christina, I have a question for you. Are you able to monetize your
Yeah,
show?
so I mostly, like I had said before, I mostly play schools, and schools, among artists, we describe schools as like the last funders for living artists, like the sort of that institution that for the most part is still there. But I know even schools have been doing tons of cutbacks. But I have, they mostly just pay fees. I don't have a GoFundMe for my own career. We have crowdfunding for Auntie Sewing Squad, which has been pretty successful. But yeah, I already was playing schools, which still managed to have a budget for some sort of cultural program. They still have theater departments. That's where I'm able to manage to eke out a livelihood in this moment. But I also know I'm a very rare bird, in that I happen to have a solo show themed to the election that I was willing to restage for Zoom. So, and I already was talking to some of the schools already before this. So I am like the 1% of artists that has been able to make a living right now.
I don't know if Christine Sakota is still on the call. I think she is. Christine, are you there? Hi, thank you for still being with us. Have you heard anything from the presidential election that makes you believe there will be some kind of New Deal or some kind of rescue package for the arts beyond what we have seen, the CARE Act and all that?
So that's a really good question. You heard firsthand today from these artists and organizations how wonderful their work is, but also how hard it is to really do this and sustain in this country where we have a mix of philanthropy as well as government support and earned income, so ticket sales, etc. But the United States, compared to other countries, we don't fund the arts as significantly. So we will see. I am definitely part of some national conversations that the Americans for the Arts, which is a national member association of local arts agencies like mine, has been convening groups And there's a lot of interest and energy around like a new deal for the arts that would say, we need to fund artists, we need to include arts and culture as part of investments, as part of infrastructure, workforce programs. Now, whether that will happen at the federal level might also depend on who's in office. I do believe Biden's team is trying to at least look at and consult with organizations like Americans for the Arts, so at least they're thinking about it a little. It also can happen though at other levels. So I know my colleagues at the state, California Arts Council, for example, they're also looking, is there something they could do at the state level? And then those dollars could flow down to us at the local level. So we can advocate at all the levels. It doesn't have to only be federal. Even at the local and state level, they can do initiatives to support the arts and in recovery and our sustainability going forward.
All right, thank you very much. And we have a question from Frank Blanquette.
My question is for Roberto. Roberto, you mentioned the Latino community, the Mexican-American, Spanish-speaking community you are surrounded by. Do you see participation in the arts from indigenous artists that maybe don't even speak Spanish and are more comfortable speaking languages like Nahuatl, Maya, Mixtec, or other indigenous languages?
Absolutely open to the idea. I welcome it. We can translate, we can help, translate the work. And if it doesn't need translation because it's art, it'll be just welcome. That really will show more of the mix of us, definitely.
Do you
we
see
haven't
it
heard
at all?
anybody yet, but we would love to.
In your local community, you don't have such artists?
Well, there are many small towns, so we're trying to reach them all, and that's been a challenge as it is. Mm-hmm. If we find anyone with a language barrier, we're not going to limit that at all. No, so we won't.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying a little bit later afternoon. And this has been a very wonderful presentation by everyone, and we really appreciate you being here. Sandy?
Yes, you've given us an hour of artistic inspiration, all of you. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.